So moderation has become a derogatory word in the political world, while it's a virtue in most systems of faith, which counsel avoiding extremes of all kinds, even extremes of spiritual practice, and spreading one's energy out rather than fixing it in one place. Moderation sees both sides of the question, finds truth in the middle of extremes, finds it easy to be tolerant of shades of gray and variations of belief. You wouldn't know it from listening to the rhetoric these days, but moderates can actually get things done in a pluralistic society. Those who take extreme positions tend to demonize those who don't agree with them, or catastrophize what will happen if those who disagree with them prevail. And since it's a sin to compromise with demons or court catastrophe, deadlock ensues, even when some are willing to deal. That's where we are at the moment in our nation, and it's a sad and scary place to be. It does seem to me that what our nation needs is a strong resurgence of moderates, but that's easy for me to say, being one. We're probably not going to get that for a while. It seems that there is something about this baby boom generation which makes for extremism, and until the more practical and streetwise Gen Xers can take the reins of politics, I'm afraid that we're in for the same old deadlock. I hope there's something left besides crisis. So my aim this morning is not to convert you to a different set of values or political opinions from the ones you so rightly have. Instead, my aim is to both share what science knows about political liberals and political conservatives, and since nobody seems to have troubled themselves to study political moderates, what my guesses are about that group. They're the ones who decide election after election in these polarized times. You'd think that some studying would have been done. Instead, the whole group gets just called undecided, as if they had no moral integrity of their own. Unitarian Universalists believe in the worth and dignity of all people, and that always means extending ourselves in understanding, even to people who don't vote like we do or who don't prefer to give themselves the same political label which we cherish for ourselves. We UUs also value learning, truth, and intellectual progress, even when it's uncomfortable. Let me just prepare you for that uncomfortable part right from the start. Finally, understanding others might make it possible or more likely that you'll be able to sway them to your way of thinking. So if you get too uncomfortable, think of it that way. So here we go. So we all have the same moral taste buds, but we have them and use them in different proportions and about different subjects. So here's the liberal moral tongue. As you see, the basic liberal moral matrix is very high on the values of care. It also values freedom and fairness, while the values of loyalty, respect for authority, and sanctity get pretty short shrift. As a matter of fact, in ultra-liberal circles, respect for authority, sanctity, and loyalty are sometimes treated as anti-values, worse than useless. How does this play out in real life? Well, for instance, the UUA's work on our nation's problematic immigration process this year have focused very heavily on the suffering of children whose parents are undocumented, how inhumane it is that undocumented families are separated from each other in the process of immigration problems. And all of that sense that the most important part of our immigration broken system is the children part comes from that care moral taste bud, which is very strong in liberals. There are many other ways to argue for immigration reform, after all. You could also focus, for instance, on how our current immigration mess has made scofflaws of many otherwise law-abiding farmers and employers. But that's not moral reasoning that appeals to liberals, because that appeals to the loyalty and authority taste buds. Here's the conservative matrix of values according to Haidt. Conservatives, orange in this slide, tend to use the 6 moral taste buds more evenly than liberals do, judging whether things are good or bad using more criteria. Within each taste bud, they focus on different areas than liberals do. You can see that if we go back to that freedom slide. Everybody values freedom. But liberals tend to focus on expressive freedoms, like freedom of speech, and social freedoms, especially for what we like to call historically marginalized populations, like women, gays and lesbians, people of color. It's kind of a combination of our values of care and freedom. Conservatives, on the other hand, tend to focus on freedom from government, taxes, legal restraint, and what they tend to call the nanny state. Liberalism, according to Haidt, is a mix of moral taste buds, which is libertarianism, according to Haidt, is a matrix of moral taste buds entirely focused on the freedom taste bud. Nothing else matters to libertarians. Libertarians judge everything by that one foundation alone, which is why Ron Paul can say that the government has no business requiring people to wear seatbelts or buying health insurance, even if people's foolishness will cause their deaths. He would not admit people to emergency rooms who didn't have insurance or other ways to pay their bills, and would remand them to charity, that is to say, to the care of people with high care values. Liberals know that means them, and they know they can't afford that bill, and that people would suffer and die, and they can hardly stand to hear about it. This so goes against the liberal taste bud of care. It's too much for most conservatives, too, who also have this value, just in a little bit smaller proportion, when they really get down to it, and that's why next month's Supreme Court decision on the insurance mandate is not a slam dunk either way. Are you feeling challenged yet? Now, I have to warn you that one of the interesting and embarrassing things that Haidt has found is that actually most people in the United States understand each other pretty well and can explain why others make the decisions they do, even if they disagree with them. Conservatives understand liberals' basic value of care, even if they insist on calling it bleeding heart. They can explain why liberals think the way they do. It doesn't work so well the other way around, however, especially with those who identify as very liberal, who not only don't agree with those who make decisions differently, they don't understand them at all. And when asked to explain conservative decision-making patterns, tend to fall back on explanations like they were duped. Haidt believes that the reason for this is that very liberal people make decisions almost exclusively based on three moral taste buds: freedom, care, and justice. They are oblivious to or even derisive of the other three: sanctity, authority, and loyalty. So it's like, how do you help a person who lacks a sweet tooth understand why some people spend money on ice cream? It's hard to do. Thus, liberals mischaracterize conservatives, which makes conservatives think that liberals are stupid, which they're not loath to say. Conservatives, on the other hand, with a better understanding of their opponents, can caricature liberals, purposefully misleading people to their gain. Misery all around. But it must be said, knowledge is power. I'm very interested in the reasons for the political impasse in this country and worried about it, as most of you are. So I'm following Haidt with great interest, and even greater interest when I realized that his work explained something to me that I had never understood, which is why I'm always so exasperated with the people who vote like me but don't seem to think like I do. It gave me ways to define this confusing, not much studied, often denigrated realm of political moderates. And I figured that if I was going to run for president, this was something that I should understand and learn to articulate. So this is my speculation. It's not Haidt's work, as he doesn't talk much about political moderates. This is a picture of one kind of political moderate. They're the blues. This person is a lot like a liberal in that they value care, liberty, and freedom the most, but more like conservatives in that they also value some parts of the other three moral taste buds. So this is the liberal who believes in the First Amendment but still cringes when somebody sews a flag to the seat of their pants, which is a violation of the loyalty and sanctity taste buds. This is the liberal who goes to a demonstration and appreciates the fact that the cops are there keeping the peace and objects when they are taunted, out of the belief that proper authority should be respected. This is the liberal who wishes that abortion rights were more often argued on the basis of the need of a couple to plan their reproduction so as to be responsible for all their obligations, rather than it's her body and she can do anything she wants with it. I think there might be another kind of moderate, one who feels in tune with the subjects conservatives choose to emphasize when discussing freedom. Freedom from taxes, for instance, and freedom for business to operate without much government obstruction, but who themselves place more value on justice or care than the average conservative, and who therefore is also often exasperated at the people they often vote with. You've got to imagine that many gay conservatives must fall into that kind of moderate camp. So one of the first memories that I have of feeling like a stranger in the strange land of liberalism, which had always been my home, was about 25 years ago, when a photographer was paid $15,000, in part by taxpayer-funded National Endowment for the Arts, for this very beautiful image. Or is it a beautiful image? The image hasn't changed, but maybe your feelings about it have. The artist said that it was created by suspending the crucifix in a jar of his own urine. He said he didn't mean political or religious commentary by it. It was one of a series. Other cultural icons got treated in the same way, but this one won a prize from the taxpayers. And it became an epic battle between liberals and conservatives. On one side, there were the artists and the liberals touting artistic freedom and the freedom of expression in general. On the other side were conservatives touting separation of church and state. I thought that was rich, who didn't want their tax dollars spent on what seemed to them to be the desecration of a sacred symbol, the crucifix. And you know, I have to say that I agree with that. I care about religious icons. I think symbols are powerful. Also, I think that human excretion is necessary but should be kept private. In other words, this picture violates the sanctity taste bud big time, at least once you know the title. That's one of the taste buds that liberals don't use much in general, but this is one way I realized I'm different. I have to tell you, I spent nearly an hour yesterday trying to figure out how I could use this example of clashing values without actually saying the name of the piece aloud in the sanctuary during a worship service, which to my sensibilities would especially violate my values. What left me feeling like a stranger in a strange land during that debate was not that the two sides clashed. Freedom of expression is an important value, and so is the sacredness of religious symbols. And when you use taxpayer money, it's pretty easy to get tangled. No, what left me feeling like a stranger in a strange land is that I wanted my side to say what I was thinking, which is, you know, you've got a point here. This is a distressing title. Yes, religious symbols are important. Maybe this artist did soil his otherwise ethereal photograph by claiming he created it with bodily waste. It is rather repellent, isn't it? And I do get it, that you're feeling that the government, supposed to be religiously neutral after all, is insulting your religion by giving this photograph a prize. Maybe that wasn't a good idea. None of that got said, at least not in my hearing. It was a great disappointment to me. I thought it had something to do with the single-mindedness of the art community at the time, and I didn't quite understand how truly fundamental my own concerns were in the moral matrix. Now I see the focus on expressive freedom and the dismissal of issues of sanctity as a particular mix of values that liberalism brings to the table. What moderates bring, then, is not wishy-washiness, but a very specific constellation of values of their own. Highest on care, especially of vulnerable people. Medium, like virtually all Americans, on justice and liberty, and also taking the three other moral taste buds into account. I have to say that the news of the past few weeks has made sense to me in a whole new way after hearing this work of Jonathan Haidt, and I hope that you share that. It was a sermon about moral ideas and how they play into politics, but I meant it also as a spiritual sermon, a sermon about deep, wise things like compassion for one's neighbors and an honoring of the worth and dignity of all in spite of the differences amongst us which sometimes loom so large. And as for running for president, well, you can tell me what you think about that on the way out the door.